They called it a family wedding, but I was the only one who felt like a stranger. It began with a scent, something expensive and forced, like roses ordered in bulk. The Wexler estate had that curated luxury that made you feel underdressed no matter what you wore. As I stepped out of the car, I adjusted the hem of my tea-length blush pink dress, once worn by my mother to her own sister's wedding. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't branded, but it mattered to me. And apparently that was the problem. I wasn't even through the gate when my sister's soon-to-be mother-in-law glanced down at my dress and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're Ava," she said, like a name she had practiced. "We weren't sure if you'd actually make it." No warmth, no hug, no welcome. Just a line rehearsed between sips of white wine and opinions. Inside, the ceremony was already in motion. My sister's in-laws had commandeered the space, white tents, gold-rimmed glasses, imported orchids. They were elegant in a way that whispered judgment. No one needed to say I didn't belong. They said it with glances, with shifting chairs, with unspoken rules. I found my seat, row H, practically in the parking lot. My name card had a typo. Not enough to claim it was someone else, just enough to say, "You're not important here." Still, I smiled. Still, I stayed. I saw Lily once before the procession. She looked radiant. She always did. We locked eyes for a brief second, mine filled with something like hope. Hers? Blank. She turned away before I could tell if it meant anything. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought I imagined it, but when I walked past the champagne station, I heard one of the groom's cousins snort laugh into her flute and mutter, "Brave choice wearing that." Another voice chimed in, "She looks like she's here to cater, not attend." It wasn't just fashion criticism, it was dress shaming, the kind wrapped in silk and sealed with laughter. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't. I took my seat. I watched the ceremony unfold, a blur of vows and curated smiles. Every time I tried to just breathe, I felt eyes on me, measuring, mocking, dismissing. The photographer didn't bother with my section. Even in wide shots, he cropped us out. I saw my parents sitting several rows ahead, laughing with the groom's family like it was a networking event. My father turned back once and offered a tight smile. My mother didn't turn at all. When the reception began, I was seated with people I didn't recognize. The assistant to the florist, someone's ex-nanny, a family friend who kept calling me Amber. I knew what this was. I wasn't forgotten. I was strategically misplaced, a message wrapped in polite logistics. I found myself slipping out toward the edge of the garden, standing beneath a trellis the decorators had forgotten to light. It was the only place that felt honest. From there, I could still hear the music, the clinking glasses, the speeches. I couldn't hear Lily's voice, but I didn't need to. I knew she wasn't saying my name. I touched the fabric of my dress, my mother's dress. It was the only thing on me that felt like home. But here, it was just another reason to be excluded. The family wedding conflict that had brewed quietly for years had finally boiled over, elegantly, of course, in linen and lace. I thought of leaving. I even picked up my bag. But then I caught a glance across the tent, someone watching me, a man, older, composed, curious but not condescending. He didn't avert his eyes when I looked back. He just nodded once. I wouldn't learn until later that he was the groom's uncle, a man the family admired but rarely invited to speak. I wouldn't know then that he had seen every look, every whisper, every act of wedding humiliation. And I wouldn't know that soon, very soon, he'd interrupt it all. For now, I just knew this. They didn't want me there. And I stayed anyway. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can wear is the choice to show up. And sometimes the most unforgettable guest isn't the one in the spotlight. It's the one they tried to erase and couldn't. They laughed before I even reached my seat. It wasn't loud or careless. It was the kind of laughter that doesn't need volume to bruise. A well-timed smirk, a glance exchanged over a champagne glass, a whisper tucked behind a manicured hand. As I moved through the reception tent, I could feel it brush against my back like a silk scarf soaked in disdain. There's a particular chill that comes with being ridiculed in real time, while everyone else pretends it's nothing. "They're just joking," someone murmured behind me. "She's so sensitive." The way they said it, like sensitivity was a character flaw and not a survival instinct, made the room tilt. It was my sister's best friend who said it. Natalie. We used to ride bikes barefoot in the summer and eat popsicles on the roof. Now she was taking jabs at me while wearing custom heels and a name tag that read, "Bridal Liaison." I'd barely made it through the floral arch when I realized I wasn't a guest. I was the pre-approved entertainment. And my outfit? The punchline. My wedding dress, or what they mockingly called it, had become the centerpiece of a very exclusive inside joke. The whisper was that I'd overdressed for attention, that I was pulling focus, that Lily warned this might happen. It wasn't just disrespect, it was wedding humiliation repackaged as etiquette. I found my seat, still at the back, near the emergency fire exit and a stack of extra chairs. My place card had been flipped upside down. No one else's had. The napkin at my place setting was crumpled, like it had been dropped and picked up again. I smoothed it without looking up. The clinking of silverware, the light murmur of string music, the curated toast schedule, it all went on uninterrupted. No one paused to consider that humiliation doesn't need an audience. It only needs permission. And in this family, permission came gift-wrapped in politeness. I tried to steady myself by locking into something familiar, the stem of my glass, the embroidered seam at my sleeve. But then someone at the adjacent table leaned over and stage whispered, "I heard she wore white to her ex's wedding too. Classic Ava." The laughter that followed was sharper, freer, laughed at, dissected, dismissed. I wasn't even in the joke. I was beneath it. I thought about my mother, about how she used to call me brave when I wore color to school dances, how she told me once that the right outfit could protect you. But where was she now? Sitting 3 tables closer to the bride, laughing with them. And Lily? Lily didn't flinch. She was radiant, poised, perfectly lip-glossed. Her laughter didn't carry to my table, but I saw it in the tilt of her head, the squint of her eyes. She knew. She always knew, and she never once looked in my direction. The family insult wasn't in what was said, it was in who didn't say anything. A waiter passed by with a tray of wine. I reached for a glass, and he hesitated just half a beat, just long enough to make it obvious. I let my hand fall back to my lap. That was when I saw him again, the man in the black suit, the one who had watched me during the ceremony. He was standing near the far end of the tent now, next to the DJ booth, holding a drink he hadn't touched. He wasn't mingling, he wasn't smiling, he was watching, still watching, not with pity, with interest. I didn't know his name yet, but I would soon. The groom's uncle. A quiet man with a reputation in the family for being blunt, respected, a bit feared. They only invited him to weddings, never to planning meetings. I remembered hearing Lily complain once, "He always says what no one wants to hear." I didn't know then that I'd be grateful for that exact quality. At some point during the speeches, I felt the first pull toward the exit. A flicker of that familiar thought, just leave, quietly, elegantly, before they saw what it did to me. But then something else rose up instead. Not pride, not revenge, just stillness, a refusal to be chased out again. So I stayed. I straightened my back. I refolded my napkin. I crossed my legs, placed my hands in my lap, and smiled at no one in particular. I became unbothered, at least on the outside. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. That silence became a sort of armor, and strangely, it worked. They didn't know what to do with me once I stopped reacting. They started glancing less. Whispers dulled, but I could still feel them watching, waiting for a crack, waiting for drama, waiting for a reason to say, "See? We told you she'd ruin something." But I gave them nothing, and that's when I became a problem. Because women like me aren't supposed to hold composure in the face of collective disrespect. We're supposed to cry, scream, storm off. We're supposed to melt down, not stand still, and my stillness was making them nervous. At the next table over, a bridesmaid shifted uncomfortably. Natalie avoided my eyes. Even the photographer paused when he passed me and gave a faint nod, unsure if he should take the shot or keep walking. And across the room, the groom's uncle didn't stop looking. It wasn't attraction, it wasn't curiosity, it was awareness. He saw it all, and he wasn't laughing. The reception tent looked like something pulled from a bridal magazine, cascading orchids, uplighting in blush tones, servers weaving like choreography. It was the kind of scene meant to photograph well, to impress people who hadn't even been invited. But as I stood at the edge, holding my breath and my clutch, it became painfully clear that I wasn't placed here by accident. My assigned table was near the catering entrance, close enough to feel the breeze every time the kitchen doors swung open. Around me sat two distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman I didn't recognize who smelled like heavy perfume and kept checking her watch, and a guy who turned out to be the DJ's assistant. None of them spoke to me. No one asked why I, the bride's sister, was sitting closer to the servers than the family. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a mix-up, maybe the planner had shuffled things at the last minute, but that illusion shattered when I passed my parents' table and saw my name, printed clean and correct, still taped to the back of the seating chart, scratched through in black ink. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. My seat hadn't just been moved, I had been demoted, excluded, but with just enough subtlety to make it deniable. That was the trick. No one had to say I didn't belong if they could just make me feel it. I kept my posture straight and my expression polite, even as my stomach tightened. Every gesture around me was choreographed to remind me of my place. Glasses refilled 2 tables ahead, but not mine. Toasts made that skipped my name. Every time I tried to look toward Lily, her eyes slid past mine like I was part of the scenery. The most surreal part wasn't the exclusion itself, it was how normal everyone made it feel. The in-laws, dressed in matching pastels and polished to perfection, offered air kisses and small talk to everyone except me. Their avoidance was so consistent it had to be intentional. It wasn't discomfort, it was confidence. The kind that says, "You've been handled." Someone asked the table next to mine if they were enjoying the imported rosé. I was drinking water from a chipped glass. There wasn't a single staff member assigned to my side of the tent. It dawned on me that I was seated with the overflow, the extras. Not quite family, not quite welcome. I sat silently through the first course. I folded my napkin neatly on my lap and pretended not to hear the soft commentary from across the aisle. One woman, who I vaguely remembered from Lily's sorority, tilted her head and said to someone beside her, "She used to be the pretty sister, didn't she?" The reply came too fast. Until Lily found her angles. That wasn't about beauty, it was about hierarchy. I'd been stripped of whatever invisible status I used to have, and they didn't even need a reason. All it took was orchestrated silence and one loud enough laugh to rewrite the entire social order. I looked down at my plate, untouched. The chicken was dry. The asparagus was cold. It didn't matter. My appetite was gone, replaced by something colder. Resolve. Because if I had learned anything in the last 3 hours, it was this. No one in this tent was going to save me. No sister, no parent, no childhood friend. If I wanted to maintain any dignity, I'd have to do it without flinching. Across the room, the groom's uncle still hadn't moved much. He stood beside the bar now, hands clasped, watching like he was waiting for something, or maybe weighing something. I saw him speak briefly to a server, then glance back toward me. His expression wasn't pity, it was something closer to irritation, like he had expected better from this family. It wasn't much, but it was something. Halfway through the reception, the photographer made his rounds. He shot every table but skipped mine. I watched as he raised his camera toward my direction, paused, then veered left. I was invisible to the lens, uninvited by the narrative being captured. I rose from my seat. Not to leave, not yet. I just needed air. I moved to the edge of the tent, near a row of hydrangeas and lanterns that flickered low and steady. The cool air helped, but the ache in my chest didn't go with it. I wasn't sad, not exactly. I was something quieter, something more dangerous. I was remembering everything. The placement, the glances, the ink-scratched name, the whispered comment about my dress, the absence of a single hand reaching out to pull me back into the fold. This was silent revenge in the making, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that waits, that watches, that doesn't interrupt the performance. It lets them clap, lets them pose, and only then walks away. But not yet. As I turned to head back toward the table, I noticed Mr. Langford, Groom's uncle, was no longer by the bar. He had moved closer, standing just inside the tent, angled toward the podium where the toasts were about to begin. He wasn't looking at the speaker. He was looking at me. And then, with no fanfare, he gave the faintest nod. Once. It wasn't approval. It was acknowledgement that everything they had tried to hide had been seen, that I wasn't imagining any of it, and that maybe, just maybe, something was about to shift. There's a specific kind of silence that settles before a toast, anticipatory, respectful, artificial. The reception tent dimmed by design, and a soft chime on the microphone summoned everyone's attention. Mason's father stood first, raising his glass and clearing his throat like someone about to deliver a monologue he'd practiced in the mirror. I leaned back slightly in my chair, far from the head table, but not far enough to unhear what was coming. He began with the usual platitudes. "We're so proud of Mason, of the man he's become." He touched on Lily's elegance, her grace, the way she brought out the best in our family. The word "our" hit harder than I expected. I wasn't just seated apart. I was being spoken about like I didn't share a single drop of blood with the bride. Then came the moment that felt intentional. "Some people," he said with a smile that was almost kind, "come into your life and fit like they were meant to be there. And others," he chuckled, "well, they make things interesting." The room laughed, not politely, not lightly, loudly, too loudly. I knew exactly who he meant, and so did everyone else. It wasn't a joke. It was a dismissal, dressed up as humor, a public insult wrapped in crystal and stemware. I kept my eyes on the floral centerpiece. Someone at the next table, Natalie again, snorted. I heard her whisper, "Is he talking about Ava?" The answer arrived in the form of side eyes, half-hushed chuckles, and an ensemble of clinking forks against glassware to drown out any visible discomfort. I wasn't the only one who heard it, but I was the only one expected not to react. I'd seen this tactic before, a practiced dig disguised as wit, designed to wound without leaving evidence, the kind of wedding humiliation that passes through a microphone and settles in your throat. Mason's father ended his speech with a quote about love, a toast to family, and the kind of grin people mistake for warmth. Glasses clinked, music rose again, and the moment dissolved into the next. But not for me. Because once the spotlight moves on, the bruise still lingers. It wasn't just his words. It was the permission his words gave. Now, it was open season. Another guest, someone from Mason's tech circle, passed by my table and gave me a friendly but unnecessary, "Hang in there." A server asked if I wanted more water while pouring Prosecco into everyone else's glasses. The photographer circled, paused near me again, and kept walking. I was being erased, in real time. The toast had given them license. The rest of the in-laws followed suit. I heard one woman mention how tastefully Lily handled the sister situation. Someone else said, "At least she didn't let it ruin the mood." These were lines built to seem benign, but they carried weight. My presence had become something people excused, like weather or spilled wine. And yet I stayed, because I wasn't about to let a room full of curated relationships decide the ending of my story. I turned my attention back toward the only person who hadn't looked away from me since the ceremony, the groom's uncle, Mr. Langford. He stood near the back, arms crossed, still watching, still measuring, and then finally, he moved. He stepped toward the front of the tent, bypassing the couple entirely. No one called him forward, no one introduced him. He didn't take the mic. He simply raised his hand, lifted his glass, and spoke. "One more toast, if I may." The tent stilled. Lily froze mid-laugh. Mason sat back down. Mr. Langford's voice was calm, but it carried through the space like wind through a cathedral. "Weddings are a time to celebrate the joining of families," he said, "but I've been sitting here wondering, "What kind of family allows a woman like her," he nodded directly toward me, "to be sidelined in her own sister's life?" The tent inhaled collectively. "She's poised, she's gracious, and she's been ignored all night by people who should know better." He didn't shout, he didn't accuse, he just let the words fall like weighted silk. "I've been in business long enough to know that how people treat the least powerful person in the room tells you everything about who they really are, and tonight, I've learned a lot." He raised his glass, not toward Lily or Mason, but toward me. "To the woman who didn't walk out, even when we all made it clear she could've. To the woman who chose grace when she was offered none. No one clapped, not yet." The air was too thick with discomfort. Someone cleared their throat. Natalie sat stiff as marble. Lily stared at the floor. My mother finally looked up. And I did nothing. I didn't nod. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I sat exactly as I had all evening, composed. Because that was the difference between being tolerated and being remembered. Mr. Langford lowered his glass, gave one firm nod in my direction, and returned to his spot. The silence didn't fill with applause. It filled with reflection. And for the first time since the ceremony began, I felt the balance shift. There was no official response to his toast, no applause, no music cue, no follow-up from the DJ, just a held breath that no one quite knew how to exhale. The groom's uncle had said what no one was supposed to say out loud, and now the tent, once perfectly choreographed, hung in awkward suspension. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't look at anyone directly. I just sat still, letting the weight of his words settle in places even I hadn't expected them to reach. Not because I wanted to claim the moment, but because I finally didn't have to. A server appeared beside me, different from the others. She placed a glass of Prosecco at my setting, crisp and cold. She didn't say a word. I nodded, and she nodded back. A small thing. But somehow, the room was already responding. At the head table, Lily stared forward, blinking like she'd been caught in a camera flash. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Mr. Langford. She reached for her water and missed the glass by half an inch. The wedding had cracked, and everyone felt it. One of Mason's groomsmen, seated to the right of the podium, leaned toward the DJ and whispered something too rushed to be subtle. The music that started was offbeat, poorly timed, like a cover-up for something unplanned. It wasn't festive, it was filler, and no one got up to dance. Natalie stood abruptly and made her way toward the back of the tent, muttering something about checking the seating chart. Her exit was too fast to be casual. Her shoes clicked with panic. I wasn't the center of the scene, not exactly, but I had become the still point, the thing no one could fully ignore anymore. That terrified them. My mother adjusted the napkin on her lap 3 times in 30 seconds. She turned toward my father and whispered something, low and strained. He gave a slow nod and reached for his wine. I watched it all like someone reading their own obituary in the morning paper, detached but aware. What was unraveling wasn't the wedding schedule, it was the control. The grip Lily and her in-laws had held over every detail, from seating to photography to casual cruelty, was slipping, and they didn't know how to course correct. You can plan for late guests, floral shortages, even rain, but not a room that suddenly sees what it's been complicit in. Lily eventually stood. Her face was tight, her smile automatic. She raised her glass, but the tremble in her wrist was barely concealed. I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice louder than usual. "To everyone who came, who supported us, especially the family who—" She glanced quickly at her new in-laws. "Made this all possible." It was a safe statement, sanitized, but it didn't undo what had been done. She didn't mention me, not once, not even indirectly, but that omission now echoed louder than any compliment could have, because the whole tent had heard Mr. Langford's words, and now her silence spoke volumes. A guest at the center table cleared their throat, too loud. Another muttered, "Wow," under their breath, not in praise, in disbelief. The air grew dense again, heavy with politeness, choking on discomfort. When Lily finished, a few people clapped, sparsely, mechanically, like they didn't know whether it was safe to engage. And that's when it happened. The photographer, yes, the same one who had skipped me 3 times that evening, walked toward me. Slowly, deliberately. He raised his camera and, without asking, took a shot. Just me. Sitting. Still. Present. I didn't flinch. The flash burst like a truth no one could redact. And with it, the wedding moved into its next phase, the part where people stop pretending and start choosing sides. The rest of the evening was quieter. Not silent, but muted. Conversations at dinner tables were more cautious, compliments more forced. People glanced at me and then at Lily, unsure of which direction offered the safest future association. A bridesmaid walked past me toward the restrooms. She didn't stop, didn't speak, but she dropped a napkin from her hand near my chair. On it, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. "You weren't imagining it." I looked up, but she was already gone. There's a kind of vindication that doesn't need celebration. That doesn't come with a standing ovation or a group apology. It arrives quietly, through the unraveling of power. When the cake was cut, the guests applauded like it was a cue. Lily smiled in every photo, but I saw it in her eyes. Something had shifted, not because of me, but because the image she'd worked so hard to build had a hairline crack in it now, and that's all it takes, a hairline crack. Once it's there, everything eventually finds its way in. And Mr. Langford? He didn't say anything else. He stayed exactly where he was, nodded only once more toward me before leaving early, without dessert, without ceremony, without even a backward glance. That I understood. Because the people who matter don't always stay to see the explosion. They're the ones who light the match, hand it to you, and trust you to decide what to do next. They didn't talk to me that night, but they stopped talking about me. That was the first sign something had changed. Before Mr. Langford's toast, the comments had flown freely, behind wine glasses, under veils of laughter. My name, my dress, my presence, they had been safe targets, dismissed as harmless subjects in a room trained to believe cruelty was tradition. But now, their eyes lingered longer. Their voices dropped when I passed. They still didn't acknowledge me, of course. My sister's in-laws weren't the type to reverse their stance out loud, but the shift was visible in everything they didn't say. I had been the wedding's unwanted variable. Now I was its quiet axis. Natalie didn't return to the tent after her bathroom exit. One of the bridesmaids whispered that she had gone to deal with a headache, but the tension in her posture said otherwise. I noticed her purse missing from the seat beside Lily and didn't bother pretending I believed the excuse. My mother avoided my side of the tent completely. Not by accident, by strategy. She stayed close to the bar, gliding between tables like a politician during a fragile campaign. I watched her wrap her arm around Mason's mother with a laugh that sounded like it cost her. Maybe it did. Invisibility only works until someone turns the lights on. And Mr. Langford had illuminated more than just me. The rest of the reception was a soft blur of performance. The photo booth reopened, the cake cutting resumed. The music turned upbeat, although no one danced like they had before. The wedding toast hadn't destroyed the event, but it had shifted the story. Now everyone was watching how the bride and her family handled exposure, and no one was watching harder than me. I remained seated mostly, occasionally standing to stretch or refill my water. I made no effort to insert myself into anything. My restraint, once mistaken for insecurity, now looked intentional, powerful, maybe even threatening. That's the thing about silent revenge. Once people notice they can't shake you, they start questioning whether you ever needed them at all. Near the dessert table, I overheard 2 women talking softly. I always thought Ava was a little, you know. I know, but she didn't even react. That was something. It wasn't praise, but it was recognition. And recognition, in families like ours, is the first crack in generational loyalty. Lily returned to her table only briefly. She looked exhausted. Her mascara had smudged at the corners, her posture more slumped than sleek. She spoke quietly to Mason, who nodded but didn't stand. Then she glanced toward me, finally, directly, and froze for just a beat too long. Our eyes locked. She looked away first, and I knew. She didn't hate me, she feared me, or worse, she finally understood that her power had limits, that being the bride didn't make her immune to consequence, that no amount of seating charts, curated guest lists, or pastel color schemes could rewrite the way people remembered this night. I hadn't ruined her wedding. She had, with silence, with exclusion, with a toast that revealed more through what it didn't say than what it did. There was no confrontation, no final scream or table flip, only presence, me, still sitting there, still whole, and her, beginning to crack beneath the weight of her own design. Later, as the venue staff started dimming the lights and stacking unused chairs, I stood. My feet ached slightly. I hadn't worn heels this high in a while, but I walked toward the exit slowly, not glancing back. The guests parted naturally. No one stopped me. No one dared. Mr. Langford wasn't there anymore. I hadn't seen him slip out, but he was gone. I imagined him somewhere quiet, finishing his evening with a glass of scotch and the satisfaction of having told the truth. Not for me, but for the principle of it. That kind of man doesn't operate out of sentiment. He operates out of clarity, and clarity is what he'd given me. Just before I reached the edge of the courtyard, a voice called out behind me. "Ava!" I turned. It was Mason. He looked unsure, like someone stepping into a conversation halfway through. Can I say something?" I nodded once. "I didn't know they moved your seat," he said. "I didn't even notice until after, and I didn't realize that people had been saying things about you. If I had, I would have—" "Stopped it?" I asked, gently. He hesitated. "Tried to." That word told me everything. Tried. Not would, not did, not will, but tried. I nodded again. "Thank you." There was nothing else to say. I didn't owe him reassurance. He didn't deserve forgiveness, but he'd come. That, in itself, meant something. I walked away. And this time, it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like release. The party was ending, but the performance hadn't. That's the thing about weddings in families like mine. Appearances don't fade with the music. They linger. They walk people to their cars. They climb into the passenger seat beside them. They post polished photos before midnight, cropped to erase whatever didn't fit. I was standing at the edge of the courtyard, the string lights behind me flickering against the darkening sky, when I heard her heels first. "Lily." I didn't turn immediately. I gave her time to catch up, let her feel the approach. When she finally reached me, she didn't speak right away. She stopped half a step behind me, like someone trying to decide which version of herself to wear before she said a word. That silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional. Then, "You could have said something." I turned. She looked perfect. Of course she did, but not untouched. Her mascara had flaked just enough to hint at friction. Her tone wasn't combative. It was something worse. Tired, controlled, too late. "I didn't think you'd want me to," I said. My voice wasn't cold, but it was uncoded. She let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's not fair." I tilted my head slightly. Number. But neither was any of this. Behind her, near the fountain, a few members of her in-laws lingered, pretending to check phones, but clearly listening. The ones who'd whispered about my dress, the ones who smiled when I was moved to the back, the ones who now pretended they hadn't noticed the shift in the air. "I didn't tell them to move your seat," she said. "But you didn't move it back either." Her eyes flashed only for a second. "You made everything so dramatic." I didn't say a word. Exactly. That stopped us both. Because she was right, in her way. I hadn't said a word, and still, the room had rearranged itself, not because I had demanded it, but because people had finally looked up, and what they saw was her, in a white dress, glowing and orchestrated, and me, forgotten but unmoved. The contrast had spoken louder than I ever could. "You made me look like a villain," she said, more quietly now. I stepped forward, just enough that she had to either hold her ground or back away. "I didn't make you look like anything," I replied. "You did that. When you let them laugh. When you let them erase me from pictures, from tables, from your life. You called it a family wedding, but you treated me like a guest you were forced to invite." Her mouth opened. No sound came out. "I wore our mother's dress, Lily." That landed harder than I expected. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, out toward the parked cars, the gravel path where Mason stood, pretending not to be watching us. "I didn't think it would matter," she finally said. "You always seem like you don't care about this stuff." "This stuff?" I asked. She waved a hand vaguely at the tent, the florals, the curated tragedy behind her. "The show. The spotlight." "I didn't care about the spotlight," I said. "I cared about being seen." That difference hit her. I saw it land. She shifted her weight, dropped her gaze. "They think you're better than me now." I didn't say that. "You didn't have to." We stood in that quiet for a long moment. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed a little too loudly, trying to reclaim normal. But there was no going back to normal. Not now. "I just wanted my day to be perfect," she whispered. "And it could have been," I said, softer now, "if you'd treated me like your sister, not your problem." She blinked fast, but the tears didn't fall. Of course they didn't. Lily's mascara was waterproof, and her control had been drilled in since we were children. Behind us, her in-laws had disappeared, like ghosts slipping into dusk. Even they knew the moment was too exposed to hover around. "I don't know how to fix it," she said. I took a breath, then said, "Maybe you don't. Maybe this isn't about fixing. Maybe it's just about seeing it for what it was." She nodded once, just once. "I won't forget what you said," she added as I turned to go. "I didn't say anything," I reminded her, and then, that was the whole problem. I walked away without ceremony, without hugging her, without closure. Because some stories don't end with a bow, they just stop needing to be rewritten. The morning after the wedding was still. Not quiet, still. Like the world had exhaled and decided not to inhale again until everyone figured out what to do with themselves. I woke early, not because I'd slept well, but because I hadn't. Sleep came in short loops, Mr. Langford's toast, Lily's voice breaking, the weight of walking away. And beneath all of it, the awareness that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the family, in me. The group chat was still muted. That was how I knew it had exploded. In our family, silence didn't mean peace. It meant damage control. If something had gone just fine, there would have been 76 photos posted already, captions filled with hashtags like perfect day and sister goals. But there were none, just the stale digital fog of people trying to rewrite a story in real time. I opened Instagram. The first photo I saw wasn't of Lily, it was of me. A black and white candid taken from across the tent. I was sitting alone, hands folded in my lap, one shoulder turned slightly toward the center of the reception. My face wasn't visible, but my posture told the whole story. I hadn't seen the photographer take it. I hadn't known it existed. The caption was simple, "Stillness is power. Some of us were paying attention." Posted by the assistant photographer, not the official one. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed to admire the image, but because it felt like a receipt. Proof that presence, not protest, had shifted the narrative. The likes grew quickly. So did the comments. "Who is she? The only one with actual dignity in the whole gallery. This is the mood for every family function where you're not welcome but refuse to disappear." Iconic. She didn't even need a mic. I closed the app, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I wasn't. I had expected to feel exposed. Instead, I felt seen. An hour later, I received a message. Not from Lily, not from my parents. From someone I didn't recognize at first. Evelyn Holloway, my great-aunt. My mother's estranged aunt, to be exact. The one we never spoke about. The one they said had issues with tradition. I opened it cautiously. "Dear Ava, I watched the live stream last night. I wasn't invited, of course, but that's tradition too, isn't it? You were extraordinary, not because you said anything, but because you didn't. I've lived a long life, and if there's one thing I know, it's that control is a myth. But grace under pressure? That's the real inheritance. Call me when you're ready. There's something I think you deserve to know. I read it twice, 3 times. Evelyn Holloway hadn't spoken to my mother in over 20 years. She was whispered about like a cautionary tale, someone who'd walked away from family, from marriage, from the idea that being tolerated was the same as being loved. She had watched, and she had seen something worth reaching out for. It was the first time anyone in the Holloway line had spoken to me as if I was the one carrying it forward. The message wasn't long, but it cracked something open. Because weddings aren't just endings, they're filters. They show you who still sees you clearly when the spotlight's on someone else. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mason. Thank you for not making it worse last night. I don't think Lily expected any of it. No apology, just a plea for silence. I didn't reply. Another buzz. This time a message from one of Lily's bridesmaids, the one who'd slipped the note under my chair. I told her she was wrong to cut you out of the planning. I told her you deserved a real seat. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry for not doing more. The pattern was clear. Now that it was safe, they wanted to be counted. They wanted credit for whispering against the storm when it had already passed. And I understood that too. Not everyone knows how to stand up in the moment, but some people remember who did. And some people, like Evelyn, remember long enough to pass the torch. I sat at my kitchen table, tea cooling in front of me, the dress I wore the night before still hanging on the back of a chair. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt anchored. Because I had stayed seated while everything else shook, because I hadn't begged for redemption, because I hadn't performed, and in return, I'd received something rarer than validation. An invitation into a legacy that had been kept from me, because they feared what I might do with it. Later that evening I replied to Evelyn's message. Just one line. I'm ready. Tell me everything. Evelyn didn't live far, just north of the city, in an ivy-wrapped house that looked like it had been forgotten by time and protected by intention. When I pulled into her gravel driveway 2 days after the wedding, I wasn't nervous. I was clear. I wasn't here to beg for stories. I was here to receive the ones that were mine by right. She opened the door before I knocked. You look like her, Evelyn said. Not Lily. Not my mother. Her. The one no one spoke of anymore. Evelyn's sister, my grandmother. The matriarch whose name had only ever appeared in hushed tones and old property deeds. We didn't make small talk. She led me to a sunlit back room filled with books, tea, and decades of defiance. Everything in her space felt chosen, lived in, but not accidental. She poured us both jasmine tea, then sat across from me, one leg crossed elegantly over the other. You already know something's broken, she said. The question is whether you want to inherit what comes after it. I nodded. Tell me. Evelyn leaned forward. The Holloway women have always had 2 inheritances, the ones written into wills and the ones they were expected to forget. She slid a leather folder toward me. Inside were copies of old letters, deed transfers, even a handwritten note from my grandmother. To be given only to the one who listens without interrupting, who stays seated when the house burns. That's the one who will understand. My throat tightened. Your mother, Evelyn continued, chose legacy through visibility. Galas, country clubs, curated perfection. She married into a family that measured worth by weddings and table settings. I left. I walked away. But not before your grandmother gave me this folder. She asked me to wait, to watch, and to give it to the one who stayed silent long enough to be heard. You mean me, I said. I mean the version of you that showed up at that wedding. The one who refused to perform. I swallowed hard. What's in here that matters now? Evelyn opened another folder, this one newer. Inside were records. A trust. Property details, shares in a vineyard estate that I didn't even know we were connected to. She left this to you, Evelyn said, but your mother and Lily never saw it, because your name wasn't on anything back then. It was written as, my granddaughter, the quiet one. They assumed that meant Lily, Until Lily proved otherwise. My hands shook. "You own the estate they married into," she said simply. "And after yesterday, people are paying attention. The press caught the uncle's beau, the image of you in that dress. It's not just a moment now, it's a narrative, and you're at the center." I sat back in the chair, the weight of history and irony pressing into me. "They excluded me," I whispered. "They tried," Evelyn corrected, "but you stayed, and that's louder than any speech you could have given." I thought of the wedding guests, the in-laws, the whispered questions, of Lily, frozen when she realized the crowd had turned, not because I had stolen her spotlight, but because she had misused it. "What do I do with this?" I asked. Evelyn smiled. "Whatever you want. Keep the estate, donate it, rename it, but do not hide. Don't inherit silence, inherit the fire beneath it." Her words rang deep. The next day, the wedding photos were posted officially. I was in 2 of them, unintended, unsmiling, unmissable. The comments were polite, but the resharing of the assistant photographer's photo had already shifted the tone. People weren't talking about the vows or the cake. They were talking about the sister in the vintage dress who didn't say a word, but somehow said everything. I hadn't planned revenge, but what I had inherited turned out to be the best kind. Because it was quiet, because it was earned, because it was mine. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just in the family. I was the legacy they didn't see coming. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't need to. The estate transfer quietly finalized within 3 days of meeting Evelyn. The papers were filed, the deed recorded. The vineyard, once featured in every one of my mother's glossy social posts as a family friends retreat, now bore my name, sole beneficiary, Ava Holloway. But I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of fire. I wanted closure, clarity, a clean, deliberate rewrite. So I invited them. Not to a confrontation, not to a public feud. I invited them to a brunch, the kind my mother used to host with antique teacups and passive-aggressive place cards. They came. Lily, my mother, my father, Mason. All 4 walked into the sun-drenched vineyard terrace with confusion, barely masked by politeness. They didn't know why I'd invited them. That made it easier. I wore white, not a wedding dress, too symbolic, too pointed, but a structured white suit that fit like intention. I looked like the kind of woman you couldn't laugh away. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing to the table. "Please, sit." The table was set for 5, not 6. There was no place for pretending this was about healing a broken circle. Some things were meant to remain incomplete. Lily sat last. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the embossed name on the napkin ring. Ava Holloway, proprietor. My mother broke first. "What is this?" "This," I said, pouring tea without shaking, "is me reclaiming what you buried. Evelyn gave me the records, the trust, the vineyard. You didn't lose anything. You just never noticed it wasn't yours to control." My father opened his mouth, closed it. Lily tried to laugh. "You brought us here to gloat?" "No," I said. "I brought you here so you'd understand one thing. I never needed to ruin your wedding. It ruined itself the moment you tried to erase me. And now, the story that came from it, the story people are talking about, it's not yours." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "Ava, I didn't—" "You stayed silent," I interrupted, "which is the same thing." Silence fell over the terrace. This time it wasn't heavy with shame. It was clean. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't crying. I was done waiting to be allowed in. I stood. "I'll leave you to enjoy the view. It's beautiful, isn't it? I'll send someone with the check." And I walked away. Past the vintage vines, past the curated landscaping my mother had once bragged about to her friends. Every step forward felt like dust shaking off. As I reached the edge of the terrace, a server stopped me. "Miss Holloway, there's someone at the gate asking for you. He says he's the uncle from the wedding." I blinked. "The one who bowed?" The server nodded. I turned and saw him. Silver-haired, sharply dressed, standing just outside the gate with a bottle of wine in hand. He bowed again. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "That night, I've never seen someone hold a room without speaking. You reminded me of someone I lost a long time ago. I accepted the bottle. Thank you for seeing me. Not just seeing you, he said, eyes kind, for reminding all of us what legacy really means. As he left, I looked down at the label. My name was already printed beneath the vineyard's crest. I stood alone, facing the estate. Not forgotten, not erased, not bitter, just written back in permanent ink, because sometimes the greatest wedding revenge isn't about crashing the party, it's about owning the venue. This story wasn't about crashing a wedding, it was about reclaiming identity, with silence, with precision, and with legacy. From the first scene, Ava's erasure was subtle but brutal. Wrong name on a place card, seated far from the head table, treated like an afterthought in her own family. But instead of reacting with rage, she absorbed it. She watched. She waited. And that patience became her power. What struck me most wasn't what Ava said, it was everything she didn't. The way she allowed them to write her out, only to return later with the deed to the very vineyard they used to shame her. She didn't humiliate them in public. She simply rewrote the story they thought they controlled. Every choice in this narrative was deliberate. The white suit at brunch, the missing sixth chair, the embossed napkin ring. These weren't just symbols. They were Ava's way of telling the truth without ever raising her voice. The pain in this story isn't loud, it's lived in. It reflects something many women understand, the feeling of being present but invisible, capable but underestimated. That's what makes the ending so satisfying. Ava doesn't destroy her family, she surpasses them, quietly, permanently. The final moment, when the groom's uncle returns and bows again, isn't about validation from others. It's about Ava finally being seen on her own terms. She doesn't need applause. She has the title deed. In the end, this story delivers what so many revenge arcs miss: clarity, control, not vengeance born from chaos, but from self-respect. It's graceful, it's painful, it's complete, and it proves the most powerful revenge isn't about making noise, it's about owning the room they once laughed you out of. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.